My name is Claire Maddox. I earned the rank of colonel in the United States Air Force, and today I'm being sued by my own family for faking it. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not from the temperature, but from the way no one on my side of the room looked at me like I belonged there. My parents sat at the front of the plaintiff's row, polished and rehearsed. My brother Malcolm leaned back with his arms crossed like this was some kind of show he'd been waiting to watch fall apart. The judge cleared his throat. The opposing attorney rose, voice sharp with confidence. Your Honor, we contend that Claire Maddox never held the rank of colonel, that she has misrepresented her military service and defrauded the Department of Defense for recognition and influence. I didn't respond. I didn't blink. My lawyer's hand hovered near mine, but I didn't take it. If I had to explain who I was to this room after everything I'd already lost. Then it happened. The courtroom doors opened with a groan that made every head turn. A tall man entered, slow but certain, his uniform sharp metals glinting under fluorescent light. Whispers rippled. Someone stood. Then another. By the time he reached the front, the entire courtroom was silent. The man stopped in front of me, looked me in the eye, and saluted. Colonel Maddox, he said. Permission to speak on your behalf, my mother gasped. My father dropped his pen. Malcolm stared. I finally exhaled. It had begun. I was 20 when I told my parents I wouldn't be attending Yale. The letter of admission sat unopened on the kitchen table next to my untouched coffee. Across from me, my father adjusted his watch like the news had merely delayed his tea time. My mother didn't speak at first. She just stared at me, blinking slowly, as if I'd said I was joining a cult. I enlisted, I said quieter now. Air Force. My father scoffed. People like us don't enlist. We lead institutions. We build legacies. I remember that exact sentence, because it clung to me for years, like smoke in my lungs. Malcolm didn't even look up from his phone. So, you're running away in uniform now. That was the last time we all sat at the same table. They didn't come to basic training graduation. They didn't send care packages. They didn't write. When my name appeared in a press release 5 years later, after a major logistics operation in the Pacific, my mother issued a one-line email. We saw the article, Hope this phase brings you clarity. It wasn't a phase, it was my life. And I built it alone. What they didn't know, what I never told anyone, outside the ranks, was what happened in Nairobi. A covert joint operation had gone sideways. Our convoy was ambushed. Communications blacked out. One of our generals, Lewis Kerrigan, was wounded and unconscious. With no orders and chaos erupting around us, I assumed command. We made it out, every single one of us. But the report, the heroics, the actual truth, it was buried under layers of classification. I signed an NDA that day so airtight it might as well have been sewn into my bones. I didn't care. We survived. That was enough. Or at least I thought it was, until the lawsuit arrived. A legal summons. From my parents, claiming I falsified my military credentials, forged internal documents, and manipulated government resources to fake a rank I hadn't earned. The first time I read the charges, I sat in my living room in silence for a full hour. Then I stood, took off my uniform jacket, folded it on the couch, and just stared at it. They didn't just want to humiliate me. They wanted to erase me. And they knew exactly where to strike. The rank of colonel isn't just a title. It's trust built over years of leading through hell. But to civilians who've never worn the weight of command, all it takes is one seated doubt, and everything you've done becomes maybe she faked it. My lawyer, Rebecca Lynn, was calm. Too calm. She said we could settle, apologize for confusion, agree to a sealed correction. I stared at her for a long time before answering. If I lied to make this easier, then I never deserved the rank to begin with. She studied me, then nodded once. Then we fight. But understand, without classified clearance, there's no record of that mission. To the court, you'll look like a ghost in a borrowed uniform. I smiled. Oh, just barely. Good, I said. Let them underestimate me. They've done it before. That night, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were handwritten notes from Air Command School, a folded flag from a funeral no one in my family had attended, and a photo, me aged 26, dirt on my face standing next to General Kerrigan in a makeshift outpost somewhere between despair and daylight. His hand was on my shoulder. We were both still breathing. I placed the photo back in the box. This time, I wasn't defending myself. I was defending everyone who ever served quietly, got passed over, and kept showing up anyway. And I'd do it the hard way alone, if I had to. 3 days before the first court hearing, my brother gave an interview to a local podcast. She always needed attention, Malcolm said. Even as a kid. If I got an A, she had to get an award. If I joined debate club, she'd write a speech about bees or clouds or whatever. This whole Colonel thing, it's just a longer version of that. It's branding. I listened to it once. Just once. Then I turned off my phone. They were laying the ground carefully character assassination, disguised as family concern. The lawyer my parents hired specialized in public perception, and she made it clear their goal wasn't just legal. It was reputational. She's not mentally well, the attorney said during an early statement. We worry about her delusions of service. There's no public record of her deployment, no commendations in public archives, and frankly, she's too young to hold the rank she claims. I was 32, just young enough for people to wonder, just old enough for those same people to nod if someone planted the right doubt. The problem was I couldn't fight fire with paperwork. Most of my service record was sealed. Top secret clearance, black ops initiatives. Even my commendation after Nairobi was locked under executive review. Rebecca, my lawyer, leaned over during prep one day and whispered, "We can petition the Department of Defense for a redacted statement, just enough to confirm rank." I shook my head. Even redacted, it'll break the seal. That's not mine to risk. She hesitated. "Claire, they're calling you a fraud." I looked up from the table. So let them. There are moments when silence is not surrender. It's discipline. I wasn't going to unseal a covert operation and risk lives just to win a lawsuit from people who never showed up for mine. Instead, I prepared the only way I knew how, by remembering. In the weeks leading up to court, I ran drills alone in my garage. Not physical ones, mental. I replayed every mission where someone doubted me, and I didn't flinch. I remembered being the only woman in a freezing command tent watching 3 men debate a plan they later credited to each other. I remembered sitting across from a dying local informant in a ravaged town and hearing him say, "You listen like no one ever has," and meaning it. I remembered my CO whispering, "You have more spine than most generals," then leaving me behind on promotion day. So when the court finally convened and I took the stand, I wasn't angry. I was steel. The opposing counsel began casually, almost sympathetically. "Colonel, if I may call you that, can you tell us what year you were promoted?" I answered simply. 29. "Yet there's no publicly available promotion order under your name." "Correct. No ceremony photos." "Not for that kind of assignment." The attorney walked slowly in front of the jury, flipping pages. "And you can't provide any documents today confirming your deployment?" "No." "You can't provide names of commanding officers, no?" "Can you confirm the code name of the mission you say you led?" I paused. "No," I said again clearly. She raised her eyebrows. "So to recap, Ms. Maddox, you're asking this court to believe you with no paper trail, no commanding officer present, no photographs, no medals you can show." I held her gaze. "I'm not asking anything." She laughed softly, like she'd been handed the win. "Then why are you here?" I turned to the jury. "Because I earned what they say I faked. And if keeping it means breaking the code, I swore to uphold. I'd rather lose the title." The courtroom went still. The judge leaned slightly forward, hands folded. Rebecca didn't object. She didn't have to. She knew I'd just said the one thing none of them expected. I wasn't defending my resume. I was defending the oath. And even in that silence, I could feel it. They weren't sure what to do with someone who didn't beg. They weren't ready for a soldier who fought without raising her voice. But I was. My parents arrived at court dressed like diplomats. My father wore his Navy cufflinks despite never having served a day in uniform. My mother's brooch was a gavel made of pearl, a nod to her years on the state bench. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so sharp. They took the stand with ease, as if the courtroom was just another fundraiser or club gala. When asked why they brought the lawsuit, my mother folded her hands, tilted her chin, and smiled softly. "We're concerned," she said, "about Claire's well-being, about the false identity she's created. She's always had an active imagination." I almost laughed out loud, but I didn't move. The attorney led her carefully. "Can you elaborate?" My mother nodded as if this were a PTA meeting. She used to make up stories about commanding armies when she was 12, wore my old black pumps, and called herself General Claire. We thought it was sweet at the time, but now, she's presenting those fantasies as real. My father followed. His voice was calm, dry-clipped. I taught Claire that the family name stood for integrity, that real power didn't need to be broadcast. But she wanted spectacle, rank, glory. He looked toward me. Not with rage, not with shame, but with calculation. Like I was a bad investment, he finally had legal grounds to liquidate. Then came Malcolm. He leaned into the microphone like he was on a reality show. She said she was promoted to colonel at 29. You know how rare that is? That doesn't happen unless you know someone or lie. The lawyer raised a brow. So you believe she's lying? Malcolm smirked. Claire's smart, I'll give her that. But she's also desperate to matter. She was invisible for so long, it's like she built this military persona to prove us wrong. I closed my eyes just for a moment. Not because it hurt, but because I needed to lock the pain somewhere it couldn't bleed out in front of them. They thought this was about ego, about being noticed. They had no idea that everything I'd built was forged from the exact opposite a life spent unseen. Back at the table, Rebecca whispered, "They're going all in. Character first, facts second." I nodded, let them strip me bare. There's nothing underneath I didn't choose. By the 4th day of trial, public opinion was shifting. Talk shows ran clips of my family's testimonies with headlines like "Fake Colonel" or "Family Scapegoat." The Maddox name legacy versus lunacy, a decorated lie, veteran groups began to divide. Some questioned why I wouldn't defend myself with documents. Others called me a disgrace. But then came a message. A secure, encrypted file. From an old unit contact I hadn't heard from in years. No names, no mission codes, just a time-stamped image. Me crouched in uniform beside an injured officer, blood on my sleeve, gunfire frozen in the background. A single caption, she held the line. I didn't send it to my lawyer. I didn't upload it to the press. I just saved it. Because it reminded me of one thing no courtroom could touch. Truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to endure. The night before final arguments, I sat alone in my apartment jacket, draped over the chair dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. I'd kept every rule, held every line, followed every order. Still, they called me a fraud. I glanced at the envelope I hadn't opened in 5 years. A letter. From him. General Lewis Kerrigan. Written in thick pen, dated the day after Nairobi. I hadn't had the courage to read it, but now I would. And tomorrow I'd bring it with me. Not as evidence, but as armor. The final morning of the trial, the courthouse smelled like wet concrete and old coffee. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras aimed like rifles. I walked past them in full uniform. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. Inside, the room buzzed. Spectators whispered. My parents looked confident. Malcolm twirled a pen between his fingers. The prosecution wore victory like it had already been signed. The judge gave his usual reminders about decorum and restraint. Then he looked to my attorney. Does the defense have anything further before we proceed to closing arguments? Rebecca stood, calmly. Yes, Your Honor. We have one final witness. The prosecution spun around. Your Honor, the witness list was closed. He wasn't on the list, Rebecca replied, because until 24 hours ago, we weren't sure he was coming. The judge lifted his chin. Name a voice echoed from the back of the room. General Lewis Kerrigan, United States Air Force. Retired. Every neck turned. There he was. Dress blues, 4 stars shining on each shoulder, chest full of ribbons. He walked with a quiet power neither rushed nor theatrical. Just present. The gallery went still. One reporter dropped their notepad. Someone in the second row stood without realizing they had. When he reached the witness stand, the judge nodded. You've been sworn, I have, sir. Proceed. Kerrigan looked at the jury, then turned his eyes toward my parents. I was the commanding officer during Operation Silent Covenant, a mission that remains classified due to the sensitivity of foreign partnerships and internal vulnerabilities. The prosecution jumped in. General, we ask that you refrain from discussing any content that violates national security protocols. He nodded. Understood. He turned back to the jury. But I can say this. In that operation, my convoy was ambushed. I sustained a severe injury. I lost consciousness. When I woke up, we were clear, alive, every single member accounted for. That was not by accident. He gestured toward me. It was because of then Major Claire Maddox. My throat tightened. I didn't move. She assumed command under live fire. She re-established comms with the secondary extraction team. She directed fire suppression and coordinated medical evac under blackout conditions. And she did all of it while carrying me on a fractured leg. Gasps whispered through the gallery. Kerrigan continued. I recommended her for accelerated promotion, not as a favor, as a necessity. Because I knew this, if I ever found myself in hell again, I'd want her in charge. He turned to the judge. I've commanded thousands. I've buried more than I care to count. But I've only ever written 5 letters of commendation with the phrase, exceptional under fire. Hers was the 6th. He walked down from the witness stand, and then right there in front of the judge, the jury, the press, and the family who said I didn't exist, he faced me. He stood tall, and he saluted. Colonel Maddox, he said, it's an honor. The silence was thunderous. The bailiff dropped his pen. One of the reporters audibly whispered, "Oh my God." My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. My father looked down. Malcolm's pen finally stopped spinning. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I returned the salute. Thank you, sir. The judge cleared his throat almost gently. Court will recess for deliberation, but everyone in that room already knew how it would end. Kerrigan turned once more before leaving. Sometimes he said to no one in particular, the people who fight the quietest battles carry the heaviest truth. He walked out without another word, and I stayed standing. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because for the first time in my life, someone had stood beside me and said, she's real. And that was enough. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. Unanimous. All claims dismissed. No evidence of fraud. No grounds for defamation. The court did not simply reject the case, it condemned it. The judge's final statement was brief, but it stayed with me. This court recognizes Colonel Claire Maddox's service as both honorable and lawful. The accusations brought forth were not only unfounded, they were unjust. That word echoed unjust. My family didn't look at me as the gavel fell. Outside reporters gathered like flies. Rebecca asked if I wanted to speak. I shook my head. The truth had already spoken for me in the form of a 4-star salute. I stepped down the courthouse steps alone. They were waiting, of course. My mother approached first, her heels careful on the pavement. Claire, she said softly, we were misinformed. We thought, no, I interrupted. You chose what to believe, you always did. Her lips pressed into a line. She reached out. I didn't take her hand. My father stood behind her arms, crossed eyes unreadable. This could have been private, he said. You made it a spectacle. I turned to him. No, you made it a lawsuit. I made it a defense. Malcolm stayed on the sidewalk, not saying a word. His hands were deep in his pockets, but he couldn't meet my eyes. We're still family, my mother said one last try, voice trembling. I looked at her then, really looked. The woman who once told me to wear something less commanding to a scholarship interview. The same voice that had called my ambition off-putting. The judge's words still rang in my ears. I didn't lose a family today, I said. I just stopped pretending I ever had one. And then I walked away. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. The medal pinned to my chest caught the late afternoon sun as I crossed the street, and for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged there. Some wounds don't bleed. They don't bruise. They just close slowly, like a door you never realized had been open behind you. And when it shuts quietly completely, you don't feel broken. You feel free. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a neat slanted script I recognized instantly. Kerrigan. Inside was a folded photo. Me mid-laugh, covered in dust and camouflage, kneeling beside a young recruit. On the back, he'd written 4 words. She never needed noise. There was no signature. I framed it and placed it on my desk at the academy, where I'd been invited to teach a semester on operational leadership. Not tactics, not weapons, but judgment, restraint, honor when no one's watching. The first class was quiet. 20 cadets, all younger than I was when I'd led that mission. They looked at me like I was made of marble. Impressive, but untouchable. I started with a question. What do you do when the people closest to you say you don't exist? They didn't answer, not right away. So I told them the story, not all of it, Not the names, but the truth. That sometimes leadership means standing silent while lies scream louder. That rank is not a badge, it's a weight. After class, a cadet stayed behind. She was small, bright eyes, hands fidgeting. "My brother says I'm wasting my time here," she said, "that I'll never command anyone who listens." I looked at her, really looked, and I saw myself years ago before scars, before titles, before any courtroom. I reached into the drawer and handed her a coin, one I'd carried since Nairobi. "Then command yourself," I said, "and the rest will follow." She nodded, clutching it like it might anchor her. And just like that, I understood. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about justice. It was about reclaiming something I never should have had to prove. Myself. That night, I visited the memorial wall behind the Academy Chapel, quiet tucked between two stone pines. No press, no brass, just names. I traced the ones I knew left a small bouquet beneath one I didn't, and stood there as the sun dipped below the hills. The wind shifted, not sharp, not cold, just honest. And I realized something simple, maybe even sacred. They tried to take my rank, but I was never just a title. I was always a soldier, even when I stood alone, even when I stayed silent. Especially then, because silence when it holds truth isn't weakness, it's command.